Welcome back to the Anything Commentary. This is Michelle. And now for my first commentary. Well, this interview could not have come at a better time. I have here my commentary on Democratic nominee Kamala Harris's first interview. I think it's her first interview since she started her campaign. First interview with a conservative media outlet, which is Fox News. Interviewer is Bret Baier, who I think is I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. Who I think is a seasoned broadcaster at Fox. So before we start this, and this is just going to be a short commentary, I don't want to bore you, and I want you to watch the entire interview, which is just like 26 minutes. Biggest takeaways here from the interview is one, they talked about illegal immigration, which is a very pressing issue, the influx of illegal immigrants, and why did they repeal the Remain in Mexico law? Well, of course, not in detail, because this is just 26 minutes. Next, they also talk about gender reassignment or gender transitioning policies, especially for incarcerated individuals. Third, they talked about Trump's rhetoric. There is a segment here in this interview, and that is the part I want to highlight on, because other content creators will highlight her answers on policies or non-answers. What for me, my biggest takeaway in this interview is her facial reaction, her demeanor when the topic was President Trump. They also talked about President Biden's mental state. How is he? And well, we're going to hear another version of how she threw him under the bus. And last but not the least, the global adversaries to the United States. But also, that's not the last thing. One thing that to highlight in this interview is her flip-flopping habit, which I think is no longer a habit. I think it's a tactic. It's a pathological tactic. She flip-flops on everything. So, sit back and we're going to dissect this interview topic by topic, okay? One thing to note about this interview is how heated it was straight out of the beginning. They didn't waste any minute, no pleasantries, not much. It was just pow, 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 question after question. These are not caught up questions, not gotcha questions. The interviewer was really asking about policies and what her stance on policies are. Old policies or even current policies. So the first one that they tackled is illegal immigration. Let's watch.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress.
The first bill we proposed to Congress was to fix our broken immigration system.
Before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the elite. Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point that's in your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources and more judges. What we need to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings. What we need to do to deal with points of entry between entry points. That's where we did and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border, which is why the border patrol agents supported the bill. It would allow us to send full official claims to the United States, which is a scourge affecting people of every background, every geographic location, and not just people. It would allow us to put more resources to prosecute transnational criminals, which I have done, as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of border state, prosecuting drugs, and human beings, learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred running a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue,
I hear you.
But actually is focused on fixing it.
Democrats.
Sole focus. My focus has not been on dealing with Kamala Harris. I saw the news report. I didn't know she tried to contact me, but I'd also say it's not about you, Kamala. It's about the people of Florida. My focus is exactly where it should be. And I can tell you this, I've worked on these hurricanes under both President Trump and President Biden. Neither of them ever tried to politicize it. She has never called on any of the storms we've had since she's been vice president until apparently now. Why all of a sudden is she trying to parachute in and inject herself when she's never shown any interest in the past? We know it's because of politics. We know it's because of her campaign. I have zero time to entertain these political games. We're going to continue to do what we need to do to prepare and respond to what may be one of the most damaging storms in the history of the United States. So she says focusing on protecting your people is selfish. I think she ought to look in the mirror.
Against that bill, it would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats.
And then there's the issue of Laken Riley and those killings where the perpetrators were illegal immigrant males. And one thing to highlight here is Bret asked if Kamala feels sorry for what happened to those girls. Watch her reaction, because I don't see any remorse in her facial reaction. I don't see any accountability. I can't even hear it in the sound of her voice.
Assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday, campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election, because there was a solution, Bret.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration. I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. We need more. I was just down at the border talking with border agents, and they will tell you, and I'm sure you probably, I know you investigate and you are a serious journalist. They will tell you, we need more judges. We need to process those cases faster. We need the support for those cases that should be prosecuted. They need more resources, and Congress ultimately is the only place that's going to get fixed, Bret.
Well,
that's how this system works.
That's the premise of this question.
But
there were
that's how the
90
system
plus
works.
executive orders that were rescinded in the first days. Many of those were Trump border policies. I'm not going to stay here because there's other things to talk about, but you frequently talk to the Border Patrol Union for support of that bipartisan bill, and they did. They supported it. But they also just endorsed Donald Trump and said, you've been, quote, a failure with border security. Why do you think they said that?
I think they're frustrated, and I get it.
We allow Borders R. Harris to win this election. Every city, every community in this great country is going to go to hell. The untold millions of people, unvetted, who she has allowed into this country that are committing murders, rapes, robberies, burglaries, and every other crime will continue to put our country in peril. Only one man can fix that, and that is Donald J. Trump.
They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I'm very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So decriminalizing border crossings, like you said in 2019.
I do not believe in decriminalizing border crossings, and I've not done that as Vice President. I will not do that as President.
So these are evolutions that you've had.
No, but let's be very clear. I'm the only person who's running for president who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations, from the Sinaloa cartel to the Guadalajara cartel to people who traffic in guns, drugs, and moving. I spent a significant part of my career going after people who present a threat to the safety of the American people and cross our border with the intent of doing us harm, and cross our border illegally. And I will do that work as Vice President. I take that work quite seriously.
This is a time when voters, especially here in Pennsylvania, are inundated with commercials and ads. They just want it to stop because it's every commercial. But many of them add noise, but a few of them seem to break through. This particular one from the Trump campaign has gotten a lot of attention.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
My stance on this gender transition, government-funded gender transition surgeries for inmates is that doesn't the government have anything else to spend on, like healthcare? As far as I know, U.S. healthcare is not, it's not top-notch compared to other countries. Education or social services. Why spend taxpayer money on gender transition surgeries, basically as a whole? Because this should be elective procedures. And if an individual wants to change her gender, I've always been an advocate of you do you, I do me. If you want to change your gender, make sure it's out of your own dime, out of your own pocket. You don't get that from the Federal Reserve. You don't get that from the taxpayers' money. There are a lot of other things the government should be spending on. I've mentioned already: healthcare, education, social services, infrastructure, border protection, local protection, police protection. I could name a lot, but gender transition should not be on that list, whether you are incarcerated or a free individual. This should be an out of your own dime, out of pocket surgery. It's an elective surgery.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you know what, you got to take
during
responsible for what happened
presidency.
in your administration.
Yeah, no surgeries happened in his presidency.
It's in
so
black and white.
would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads.
And now she criticizes Trump for spending $20 million on that ad, criticizing her about supporting or sponsoring gender transition surgeries for inmates. What do you care? $20 million, that's probably out of Trump's own pocket. It has never come from taxpayer money. He's been out of office for 4 years. While you're the sitting vice president. You have the access to all the funds. And you choose to spend it on gender transitioning surgeries for inmates? Do you know what kind of threat or danger you're posing the female inmates to? I'm not going to get into that, but you can Google that topic all over YouTube. All I'm saying is, gender transition surgeries, I'm not totally against it. I feel like it's an elective surgery procedure. It's not kind of like a life or death surgery, not unlike a heart transplant or something. This should not be an issue because it should not be a national issue. The reason why it's only a national issue is because it's being sponsored by the government, which should not be. Really, there are really other things that the government should be spending money on.
Trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people.
Trump recognized the dead weight of needless, ever-multiplying regulations and attacked them in a way no previous president had done before, achieving great success. This was the equivalent of a major tax cut. The border was secure under Trump. Resources for the military were increased. No wars erupted. When the pandemic hit, COVID vaccines were developed in record time. Production of oil and gas was encouraged, and energy independence was achieved. It was ideology and a visceral dislike of Donald Trump, not the COVID crisis, that animated the perverse policies of Biden and Harris that reversed these impressive gains. Government spending went berserk. The Biden-Harris war on energy has reduced potential oil production by 3 to 5 million barrels a day. A tsunami of regulations ensued, and the Biden-Harris regime is attacking almost every modern convenience, not to mention the traditional automobile. The worst inflation in over 40 years slammed the American people. The book goes over what we can expect in a second Trump term. The 2017 tax cuts made permanent and new reductions added, like no taxes on Social Security and tips. There will be a new energy boom. Regulations will be whacked. A merit-based immigration system is likely to be pursued. Out-of-control spending will be hit hard by getting rid of useless programs like green energy boondoggles and massive waste. Elon Musk is champing at the bit to get started here.
People. Whereas, at $20 million on that ad, on an issue that, as it relates to the biggest issues that affect the American people, is really quite remote. And again, his policy was no different. Look at where we are, though.
They say
on plans for the American people,
on.
I'm offering a plan to deal with affordable housing. I'm offering a plan to deal with what we need to do to strengthen small businesses, which are the backbone of America's economy.
Businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes.
America's economy. I am offering a plan that is about taking care of young parents and giving them the support they need. My plans for the economy will strengthen the economy, as have been reviewed by 16 Nobel laureates, Goldman Sachs, Moody's, and recently the Wall Street Journal, which have all studied our plans and have indicated my plans for our economy would strengthen our economy, his would make them weaker.
She's not talking about her economic policies, the policies that she's so proud of because Wall Street Journal, Wells Fargo, or whatever, the other economic SMEs, subject matter experts, have quote-unquote supported her policies. Well, I think one of those have debunked, have just said that they didn't actually approve it, something like that. I'm going to find that piece and I'm going to post it along with this comment. This is nothing compared to Trump's Bloomberg interview, which I'm going to post as well, so you can juxtapose.
We're going to bring the companies back. We're going to lower taxes still further for companies that are going to make their product in the USA. We're going to protect those companies with strong tariffs.
You're also talking about 20% tariffs on the rest of the world. That is going to have a serious effect on the overall economy.
I agree. It's going to have a massive effect, positive effect. It's going to be a positive, not a negative.
Well,
let me just, I know how committed you are to this, and it must be hard for you to, spend 25 years talking about tariffs as being negative and then have somebody explain to you that you're totally wrong.
Like I said, that was something of a put down now, wasn't it? James Freeman joining us this morning. James, Wall Street Journal guy, your opinion, will Trump's tariffs plan help or hurt the U.S. economy?
The tariffs hurt their costs. Trumponomics overall is going to be positive for the economy. Now, I think that's why people are kind of wondering why at this meeting of an economics club, why are business people cheering taxes on trade? And it's because they're looking at the whole agenda, which is renewing the 2017 Trump tax cuts, reining in regulation. They accept the tariffs as a cost, and also for the reasons Art Laffer was talking about, they are not necessarily going to be as bad as they look now, because it's a question of is he putting these in for their own sake or as leverage to negotiate?
Oh, it's negotiation, isn't
And
it?
there is precedent there where you look in the first term, he threatened tariffs on Mexican beer and avocados, got right up to it. Mexico agreed to enforce their southern border, and he took them off. So,
do you think more people say they trust him on the economy than they trust you?
I think that when you look at an analysis of our plans for what we would do as President of the United States, it has been clear to those who study and understand how economic policy works that moving forward, because I do believe the American people are ready to turn the page on the divisiveness and the type of rhetoric that has come out of Donald Trump. People are ready to turn the way forward. They want a president who has a plan for the future.
Whenever I listen to Kamala answer questions about her economic policies, it's like listening to not a kindergartner, but an elementary schooler. Oh, my policy has been backed by my mom, by my dad, by my aunt, by my uncle. Come on.
Mr. President, you were asked on 2 different shows last week what, if anything, you would do differently than President Biden. Here's what you said.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be, and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I know.
And so that would be one change in terms of... But also, I think it's important to say with 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency.
Way to go, Kamala. But in a way, when it comes to this question, it's like she's caught between a hard and a rock place. Is that the idiom? It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. You should be damned if you didn't talk trash about the current administration because people are clamoring for change. They call this the election of change, something like that. She'll be damned if she doesn't talk trash about the current administration because then she'll be part of the problem. So I guess this is her best way out of this, just to talk trash about the current president. Anyway, he is outgoing, and if she's lucky, she'll be the incumbent. But it just speaks about her integrity. In the first place, she should have known she'd be caught in this kind of position, and that she should not have accepted the nomination, which was just handed to her, by the way, hadn't Biden been so out of it. She shouldn't have accepted the nomination because she is the face of the administration in today's election without the current president running. She should have just said no, distance herself from it, but no. Her ambition. She was so ambitious because she's all about girl bossing, being the wokeist, all that nonsense. She's so far leftist that she doesn't mind who she tramples on, who she runs over, who she throws under the bus, for as long as she gets a chance to be the sitting president. And speaking of trampling on, throwing under the bus, running over, watch what she says when we get to the topic of Trump. You have to see her facial reaction. Clue. You have to check her teeth. How angry those teeth are and those eyes are.
And like every new president that comes in to office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing, American bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small business, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business, including my plan for $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers, and for small business extending the tax deduction from $5,000 to $50,000.
For a lot of plans in recent days, your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. Rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American...
If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become... But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, the former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president, one, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
If that's the case,
an election for president of the United States, it's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to
what he has been saying about the enemy within, that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
He was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the president of the United States in the United States of America should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
Her campaign is not about making America great, which is what Trump has been campaigning. Her campaign is just to get rid of Trump altogether. If she could kick him out of the United States, she will. This is not motivated by goodwill. This is my assessment of her campaign. Her campaign is not motivated by goodwill. Her campaign is motivated by an ulterior motive to kick Trump out, which is why he's been sued by courts for the last 4 years. They just want him out of the presidency, out of politics, out of the decision-making process, out of influence, out of the country maybe. You can see it in her eyes, in her demeanor, in the way she grits her teeth when she was talking about Trump, how she hates Trump. And this is the motivation of her campaign. It's hatred. She speaks about campaigning, not about knocking down the opponent, not about saying ill things about the opponent, but about lifting people up. She's guilty of that. She's knocking down Trump. Of course, Trump is going to retaliate, but his rhetoric has always been about how to make the country great and strong again. Her campaign is filled with anger, with Trump derangement syndrome. Her campaign is filled with hatred for the person and for the people who are supporting him. Voters, look at this closely. This is a very telling interview. Not just her words. You don't just listen to her words. Don't just listen to her answers, which, by the way, are non-answers. She didn't answer anything. Look at her facial expressions. Look at how she grits her teeth. Look at her demeanor. Look at how many times she raised her hand to stop the interviewer from asking. Of course, he's going to press for questions. Of course, he's going to cut her because she's not answering anything. Her campaign, her motivation is not for the country to be great again, but just to oust one person, a person that she hates. She hates that person too much. And if you're going to be a president, you can't hate anyone. You cannot be fueled by hatred. Sure, you don't like the people that you engage with, but that's dislike, not hatred. What I've seen here towards the end, especially when they were talking about Trump, is how much she hates the person, how much she hates Trump. You could see her teeth. She grits her teeth, and I can't get enough of that part.
Well, experts thought you would say China. The FBI director had said that, but you said Iran. If that's the case, what do you say to critics who look at the actions of your administration and say you're not acting like Iran is the #1 threat?
When it comes to the topic of the biggest threat to the U.S., you have to wonder, why do they have so many enemies? Is it because they're the greatest country in the world? They're not really the greatest country in the world anymore, but this is all because of the military-industrial complex. They love getting into wars because it's ka-ching for them. Now, when it comes to the biggest threat assessment, I am not that knowledgeable when it comes to global conflicts. All I know is they should not have started that war with Russia. They should not, that war in the Middle East that could have been prevented. And all these wars, we didn't have any wars when Trump was the sitting president. I rest my case.